Hey guys, it's your friendly neighborhood web warrior fanatic, and today we are ranking all of the protection events in Marvel Champions. So let's go ahead and get started here with our first event, which is called Aial Intervention. This is a zero-cost protection event. Interrupt: when a character would take any amount of damage from an attack, exhaust an aerial character you control and prevent up to 3 of that damage. So this is cool because you can prevent damage for any character, right? If you're playing multiplayer, it can be another player. It could be for an ally. You do have to exhaust an aerial character you control, which can be an ally or your identity. So I think if you're playing with aerial cards, this is a very powerful effect. Being able to prevent 3 of any sort of damage, but you do have to exhaust. It's okay. I'm gonna put this card in the B tier. I think that it is a solid card. If you're playing aerial protection, this is definitely a card that I would not mind putting in there if I have an empty roster spot. And it can help mitigate a lot of damage for your identity in a situation that you need it. But you do have to fulfill the requirements of damage from an attack, right? If you are defending with your hero, if your hero has like 2 defense, then extra damage, if there's 3 more damage, then you can use the aerial intervention and you have to exhaust a different aerial character, right? Because you're already exhausted to defend. So you have to exhaust like an aerial ally or something like that to prevent 3 more of it. So it's okay. It's definitely a decent card. I think it can definitely get some good benefits if you play it right. And if you have an aerial deck, it's always going to be useful to have it in your hand with a bunch of aerial allies in play, just in case you're taking a lot of damage. Next, we have Anticipated Attack. It's a 2-cost event. Play only if there is a side scheme in the victory display. Hero Interrupt. Defense: when an enemy initiates an attack, give your hero a tough status card. So this is a hero interrupt, right? And it counts as a defense because it has a defense keyword and it has a defense like words right here. So this card is pretty cool because the interrupt will happen before the attack, right? So when the villain initiates an attack, you get the tough status card, and the tough status card will probably block out the damage from the attack, and hopefully the enemy does not have piercing. 2 cost, you do need a side scheme in the victory display, but assuming that we're playing around this card, we should already have the side scheme there, right? No, but that means that this card is not that good early game because you would not have been able to clear the side scheme super early on unless you're like Cable. When an enemy initiates an attack. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a useful card. I'm gonna put this card in the C tier. I think it's definitely good, but so when I evaluate cards, I don't evaluate it being trade lock against them, right? So with the aerial card here, we're going to evaluate this card as if we're playing with the aerial deck, with aerial allies or something like that. For Anticipated Attack, even if we are playing a deck with a bunch of side schemes, there's no guarantee that you draw that side scheme on turn 1 and that you can clear it unless you're playing Cable, right? So there's no guarantee to have that side scheme in the victory display, and early on when you might really want that tough status card, you might not be able to trigger this effect. But I do think its effect is very powerful, and it's worthy of having like an A tier level effect if you can fulfill the situations that you need to maximize it, right? So I put it in the C tier here. These are cards that I think are situational. So for Anticipated Attack, it's nice because you get a tough status card and it counts as you defending, even though you don't have to exhaust, right? So any card that synergizes with defending, let me just go ahead and pull up Unflappable here because I think that this is going to be key for a lot of the cards that we're talking about. So Unflappable is a very popular protection upgrade. It says, after you defend against an attack and take no damage, exhaust Unflappable and then draw 1 card. So normally when you defend, you have to exhaust your hero to defend. But if you play any cards that have this defense keyword right here, this is considered a defense activation in Marvel Champions. So it will fulfill the requirement for Unflappable, where it says after you defend against an attack. So if you play Anticipated Attack, it will have synergy with Unflappable, and then since it gives you a tough status card, you probably won't be taking damage, and you can exhaust Unflappable here to draw a card. So I think this does have a very powerful effect. You just have to fulfill all the requirements that you need that goes with it. Like, you know, probably having Unflappable out and making sure you have a side scheme in there. So it's in the C tier, but I think its effect is very powerful. And 2 cost is a pretty good cost to get a defense and a tough status card out of it. So I think it's a very powerful card. Next we have Bait and Switch. 1 cost event, hero action, thwart. The villain attacks you, remove 4 threat from the main scheme. So this is not my favorite card. I think it's good for scenarios where you don't mind taking a bunch of villain attacks, or if you want to get that villain attack during the player phase because you're playing perfect defense, because you can exhaust yourself to defend during the player phase and exhaust again to defend during the villain phase. However, it has most synergy whenever you do have the perfect defense stuff set up, right? 1 for 4 threat move is good, but then taking a villain attack, I mean, that could be detrimental, especially against some more difficult villains. So I think if you're playing this card like in a deck against Ronin or Expert Venom Goblin, like the tougher villains, is not going to be very useful because after they activate, I mean, really bad things will happen, so you don't want them to activate. So I'm going to put Bait and Switch in the C tier. It definitely has a use, just you need a lot of other stuff set up to really get the full benefits of this card. Next we have Counterpunch, 0 cost event, response attack. After your hero defends against an enemy attack, deal damage to that enemy equal to your hero's attack. So basically it's after you defend, right? So part of defending counts as like, you know, like we talked about earlier, the anticipated attack, because it has that defense keyword right there, right? So if you play defense attack, you can still play counterpunch because it counts as you defending, even though you're not exhausting, right? So after you defend, you can counterpunch, punch the villain back, and then just do damage equal to your attack. Very solid all-around card. I'll put this card in the B tier. I think it works very well for minions as well, right? Because if a minion attacks you, and let's say the minion has 2 hit points and you have 2 attack, you can defend, take no damage, play a counterpunch. Well, it doesn't matter if you take damage or not, but right. But if you defend, you can play a counterpunch. You can hit the minion, and then you don't have to exhaust your hero in the player phase to defeat that minion. You can just defeat it with the counterpunch here, which is 0 cost. So I do like counterpunch a lot. I'm putting it first in the B tier because I think there's also more synergies with this card, right? If I have an empty Rosh slot in my deck, counterpunch can more than fill in for a protection deck. And if you have other things that build up your hero's attack stat, right? Like if you're playing X23 in protection, she might have like, you know, +5 attack, +7 attack until like the end of the round. So when you play a counterpunch, it's 0 for 7 during the villain's phase. So there's definitely ways to make this card more beneficial. But as worst, I mean, it's still a decent card that can like defeat off minions as long as you are defending. Okay, next we have Defiance, a 0-cost event here. Here, interrupt defense, so this has a defense keyword as well. So you play this card, you do not need to exhaust to consider defending for cards like Unflappable right here. Here, interrupt defense, when a boost card on an enemy attacking you would be turned face up, discard instead. So very, very good. You don't need to see the boost card. It's an interrupt, so it's before the boost card is actually turned face up. You have to play Defiance and get rid of it. So you don't know what you're getting rid of, but it's very, very good for perfect defense because it'll help you know for sure how much the villain is attacking you for, right? If the villain has 3 attack and attacking you with a boost, you don't know how much damage it's going to do, but you play Defiance, it will negate the boost, so you know that for sure it's only going to be 3 attack, and you can defend for just 3 exactly to fully defend, take no damage, and draw a card with a lot of synergies like Unflappable. So this card is very, very good. It says an A tier level card. I want to put an A tier for right now. I think I'm putting it in an A tier for right now. And it's not just because, so it works very, very well with perfect defense, right? Because it helps you know how much damage you're taking. But I think even if you're not playing perfect defense, this is an extremely powerful card because it gets rid of the boost effects as well, right? So if you're facing a villain that might have a nasty boost effect, you don't know what it is yet, but you can just play this card, negate it, and you don't have to worry about that boost effect. So this card I think is good in every single situation. It's good every single turn that you're in hero form, right? Because it's a hero interrupt. So the villain's always attacking. You can always get benefits out of canceling a boost card, right? Even if you're not even defending, right? This counts as defending by me not making a basic defense, right? So if you play this card and the villain would do, 3 base damage plus a boost of 2, cancel out the boost card, you're going to take 3 damage. So I think this is a very, very powerful card that you could definitely build around and has even more synergy with perfect defense. Next we have Deflection, 2-cost event, hero interrupt. When an identity would take any amount of damage from an attack, prevent up to 5 of that damage. Discard cards from the top of your deck equal to the amount prevented that way. Okay, so you can prevent up to 5 of the damage, and then you just have discard cards from the top of your deck. So yeah, I mean, I think this card I'm gonna put in C tier. I think it's okay. 2 cost is a little bit expensive for this type of effect, but it's nice because you can nullify some damage, and it works very well with perfect defense, right? So you can make sure you don't take any damage. But I put it in the C tier because it is kind of limiting because you want to be playing in a way where you want to mitigate that damage, and you want to be playing in a way to where the villain's not doing more than 5 damage to you, right? So against super tough villains, it might be impossible to block all the damage. But if you can block all the damage, this card will trigger with all the other perfect defense stuff like Unflappable. So because it's very situational and a little bit more expensive, put it in the C tier here. Not as good as Anticipated Attack, but I think it's better than Bait and Switch. They can be argued. I think they're very close, but I'll just put it like here for now. Next, we have Desperate Defense, a 1-cost event. Here, interrupt defense. So this also has a defense keyword and counts as you defending. When your hero defends against an attack, it gets +2 defense for that attack. If you take no damage from that attack, ready up your hero. So this card I think is very good as well. I'll put this in the number 1 C tier. So the thing is, for me personally, I'm not the biggest fan of Perfect Defense. And we're going to see a lot of Perfect Defense type of cards in Protection, because Perfect Defense does not work against the most difficult villains, right? It work against, like, you know, weaker villains like Green Goblin. It might work against Ultron, but it will not work against Expert Ronin or Expert Venom Goblin or Expert Magneto, right? So just the archetype in itself, I think, has a lower ceiling than a lot of other different archetypes. So because of that, I can't put this card in the A tier, even though it's a very good card for Perfect Defense, right? Perfect Defense can be tons of fun. I like Perfect Defense, right? But I'm just not a biggest fan of it for the more difficult scenarios. So because of that, when I'm ranking cards like this, I have to evaluate them for how strong they are. And Desperate Defense, I think, is good for Perfect Defense, but Perfect Defense itself is not the strongest archetype to play. So yeah, I mean, it's a very good effect. You get +2 defense for only 1 cost, and you get a ready up if you don't take damage. So this will have synergy with Inflammable, all the other Perfect Defense stuff that we talked about. So very, very solid card for Perfect Defense. And if you're playing Perfect Defense, I would definitely include this card. But playing Perfect Defense and including this card will probably mean that you'll struggle a little bit with Ronin in the more difficult scenarios, just because it hits so hard that you'll always have to be taking damage, especially in expert mode. Next, we have Ever Vigilant, 2-cost event. Play only if your identity has the aerial trait. So we're going to evaluate this card as if we're playing with the aerial character. Hero action, ready your hero and remove 2 threat from the main scheme. So this card is very, very good. I actually like it a lot. It's a great way to remove easy threat from protection. Yeah, I think if you're playing a protection deck with the aerial character, Ever Vigilant is very, very powerful. Getting a ready for 2 costs and just removing off 2 threat. It's a super solid card. Is it? It has to be from the main scheme, which is a little bit restricting. I'm going to put it first in the B tier. I think that if I have an empty roster spot in an aerial protection deck, this card is like more than welcome. But I think it's a little bit too limiting to put it as like a card that I build around in the A tier, just because it's only 2 threat from the main scheme. 2 is not that much threat removal, but the readying up is very, very nice. It can be argued. I might bump this up later. Next, we have Expert Defense, 0-cost defense event. Here, interrupt. When your hero defends against an attack, it gets +3 defense for that attack. So very similar to the Desperate Defense, but it's free to play. I think that makes it a little bit more versatile. I'm going to put this card in the B tier, put it right here. So definitely there are going to be times where Desperate Defense is better than Expert Defense. But the thing that I like about Expert Defense is that this will help against the more difficult scenarios, because it doesn't matter if you still have damage bleed over to your hero, right? This just gives you a +3 defense, which is allowing you to defend a little bit more. Yeah, so I think I like this card a lot more because it can go into decks that aren't Perfect Defense, and for being just such a cheap, 0-cost event, it can just help you nullify some damage whenever you're taking damage. So I think this card has more versatility and not even necessarily a lower floor, a lower ceiling, I mean, because I think that this card actually has more a higher potential than Desperate Defense, even though in Perfect Defense, Desperate Defense is better. Actually, arguably, they can actually be argued. I can even see in Perfect Defense why Expert Defense is better, because there's other ways for you to trigger other effects if you don't take damage, and you're getting +1 more defense, right? +3 here. This one's only +2, and it's a 0-cost event. So even in Perfect Defense, Expert Defense is a great card. Next, we have Fighting Fit, 2-cost event. Hero action attack, deal 2 damage to the villain, 5 damage instead if your hero's remaining hit points are equal to or greater than your hero's starting hit points. So this is a very good card if you are very healthy, if you have ways to manufacture your health and just increase your starting hit points, right? So if you have a bunch of hit points, it's 2 for 5, which is very good. Other than that, it's 2 for 2. I think that because of that, it's going to be a little bit inconsistent for me. So I'm going to put it in the C tier. Not a terrible card. I'm going to put it right here. Right behind Anticipate Attack and before Deflection, because it's a strong attack event, right? Being able to do 2 for 5 is pretty good for protection. Just a little bit of a limiting condition, because you need to be at full hit points or even greater than that. Okay, first hit, 1-cost event. Hero action attack, deal 2 damage to the villain. And one thing I want to go back, sorry about that. Fighting Fit, you can only do damage to the villain, so a little bit less versatile because you can't use it to control the board and hitting minions. So I do think that hurts it a little bit. So first hit, anyways, do 2 damage to the villain, or here interrupt attack. When a minion initiates an attack, do 2 damage to minion. So the first one right here is not that good, right? Just 1 cost event for 2 damage and must be at the villain. It's decent to have because you have 2 options of what you want to do when you draw this card. The interrupt here I think is going to be a little bit better because when it's interrupt, so it happens before the minion attacks you, right? So when a minion initiates an attack, if it has less than 2 hit points left, you can play this, kill the minion, and then you won't take damage from the minion. So still not a terrible card, definitely has its uses. And I like that there's 2 effects. I'm going to put it behind Bait and Switch. Still the worst card so far that we've seen in protection, in my opinion at least. Get Behind Me, 1 cost event. Here interrupt, when a treachery card is reviewed from the encounter deck, cancel its 1 reviewed effects. The villain attacks you instead. So 1 cost for this type of effect. I mean, it could be life-saving, but not my favorite card. I'm going to put this card somewhere around here. Let's see. The villain attacks you instead. So would I rather the villain attack me and remove 4th from a scheme, or the villain attack me and then I get to cancel a treachery card? Well, it's hard to say. I would say the treachery cancel is usually more important, but I'm gonna actually put it behind Bait and Switch because I need to get behind me during the villain phase, and I need to get a good treachery card or like a very strong treachery card that I need to cancel. That's not worth the villain attacking me, right? And Bait and Switch I think has more times that it's useful, right? It can remove 4th from the main scheme whenever I really need it. I can play it during the player phase, so I do value that a little bit more. But at the same time, and Bait and Switch allows you to get the villain to attack you during the player phase, which has a synergy with Perfect Defense. And Get Behind Me also has synergy with Perfect Defense because the villain is attacking you again, so you can defend again and not take damage and do all that stuff. But once again, for the more difficult scenarios, we don't want the villain attacking us that much because it's going to hurt even in Perfect Defense. Next, we have Hard Knocks. 3 cost event, hero action attack, do 4 damage to an enemy. If that enemy is defeated by this attack, give your hero a tough status card. So just a 3 for 4 damage is definitely not very good. It is just a regular attack, right? But if you defeat that enemy, so if you're flipping over the villain from stage 1 to stage 2 or stage 2 to stage 3, or you knock out a minion, then you get a tough status card. So still a very, very situational card that I think you have to build around a little bit. Because 3 for 4 is not good if you're just getting it like that, but if you can knock off minions and get a useful tough, it could be very good. So a C tier card for me, I do like it more than Fighting Fit. And these are both type of like attack events here. Next we have Jump Flip, a 1 cost event. Here interrupt defense. When you would take any amount of damage, prevent 2 of that damage. If you pay for this card using an energy resource, remove 2 threat from the main scheme. So this card has that synergy with Perfect Defense, right? It helps you prevent 2 of the damage if some damage bleeds over for you to not take any damage. And hopefully you didn't take any damage when you play this. Actually, I'm tripping a little bit. This does have synergy with Perfect Defense, but it's not a key card for Perfect Defense. It's just if you pay for this card using an energy resource, then you can remove 2 threat from the main scheme. So because it's not having synergy with Perfect Defense, I am inclined to put it a little bit higher. I'll put it first in the C tier. Right, I do think the ready from Desperate Defense is more valuable than the 2 threat from the main scheme from Jump Flip. And they're both effectively giving you +2. But for the Jump Flip here, you can prevent 2 of the damage when you would take damage. For Desperate Defense, you're just getting +2 for your defense, right? So if you play a Jump Flip let's say a minion hits you for 2, right? You can play Jump Flip. It counts as a defense activation. You can prevent that damage. And then you can remove 2 threat from a scheme if you use an energy resource to pay for this card, and then trigger all of your Perfect Defense stuff, like your upgrades, like Unflappable, from that attack from a minion, and your hero stays unexhausted. So I think because of that, because this counts as a defense event, right, because of the defense keyword, so I think because of that, I like Jump Flip a lot more. And Jump Flip doesn't have to be from an attack. It's when you would take any amount of damage, like any amount of damage. So it just has more versatility, in my opinion, than Desperate Defense. So definitely a stronger card, but you still need to build around it, right? I think that if you just have this card in any random protection deck, it's not going to be doing too much, just preventing 2 damage and then removing 2 threat from the scheme for that 1 cost, right? I think that you need to have other effects that trigger, like Perfect Defense stuff, to really get to maximize this card's effect. Next, we have Leading Blow. 0 cost event, Hero Interrupt. When your hero makes a basic attack, discard the top card of the encounter deck. Reduce your hero's attack by the number of printed boost icons on that card. If the attack still deals damage, you can write up your hero. So very, very powerful card. I'm gonna put this card, it's hard to say. Does it go in the B tier or high C tier? Because I think you have to build around it is a thing. That's my only reserve about this card. So I'm gonna put it in the C tier. I think that it's a pretty good effect, right? So in the case where you build around leading blow, you build up your hero's attack, you can attack constantly, and then you play leading blow and you can ready back up and keep it hitting if you have like, you know, at least 5 attack, right? Because then it's definitely worth it. But if you are just playing any random deck and your hero has like, you know, 2 attack, 3 attack, and you don't buff it up and you attack and play a leading blow, you may not do any damage, and you do that, then leading blow is definitely a waste. So just because of that more situational use where you need to really plan around it and deck build around it, I think that I'm gonna put leading blow in the C tier. But I'm gonna put it first in C tier because I think its potential is very, very high, right? I think it has like a A tier level effect by being 0 cost and giving you a ready. And potentially if you discard a boost card with 0 boost icons, then you're just doing your full damage and getting a ready right here with 1 effective resource because you're playing the leading blow itself. So it is very, very high potential, but I think that it just has to be planned around to maximize. Next, we have Momentum Shift. 2 cost event, hero action attack. Heal 2 damage from your hero. Deal 2 damage to an enemy. So very basic card. One thing I will say is that for this card, there's a cost arrow, which means that if you cannot heal 2 damage from your hero, you cannot play this card and deal 2 damage to an enemy, right? Because of that cost requirement. So if you only have 1 sustained damage, this card cannot do the 2 damage to an enemy, right? You need to have at least 2 sustained damage and fully heal that 2 in order to do the 2 damage. So that limits it a little bit, but very decent card being able to heal 2 and then do 2. 2 cost event, it's not terrible. I'm not going to put it in a B tier. I like this card a lot, but its potential is not crazy. But I will put it, and this is a card that I use a lot. So I'm going to put it behind Desperate Defense. Anticipated attack. Yeah, I'm gonna put it behind Desperate Defense here. So unlike the other cards in here, I think that Momentum Shift has a pretty high floor, right? It can go in any deck, right? Because I mean, being a heal 2 and do 2 damage is not bad, but its effect is a little bit lackluster. So the ceiling of this card is a little bit low, and it works very well. I love this card with Wolverine protection because his claws can pay for this card, and it's pretty much just if you don't have nothing else to pay for with his claws, you can play this card for free because when you play for his claws, you have to take the damage at the cost of the attack card. So right here, actually, let me pull up his claws. Wolverine's claws. So you guys know what I'm talking about. Okay, so it's not loading right now, but so basically, whenever you play Wolverine's claws, you have to pay the cost of the event and take it as hit point damage, right? So, or sorry, you don't have to pay the cost of the event. You have to take the damage of the printed cost as your hit point damage. So if you're playing Momentum Shift with Wolverine's claws, you have to take 2 damage. But when you play this card, you heal that damage right back up, and you can still do 2 damage to enemies. So it's kind of like a free way to do 2 damage with him. But obviously that is very situational. So this card goes in C tier, but there's definitely situations where I think it can be very powerful. Next we have Muster Courage, a 3 cost event. Play only if your identity has the Avengers trait. Hero action, give up to X friendly characters a tough status card to a max of 3, where X is equal to the villain's stage number. So this card's going to be good depending on what stage number that you're facing the villain, but unfortunately it's a little bit hard to control, and 3 costs is very, very expensive. 3 costs will be worth giving 3 tough status cards, but if you don't get the 3 off, it's not going to be as good. I think this card is so expensive. I think there is still a situation for it. I'm not going to put it in D tier, right? Because giving out 3 toughs is invaluable. It's just very expensive to do, and you need to do a couple of different things. So yeah, I'm going to put it last in the C tier. I think this card almost sees no play, but you really need to be playing a villain on stage 3 to give out 3 tough status cards, and you want to be like in multiplayer because you want to give to other identities, just because it's more valuable on identities, tough is, than on allies. So this card does have a powerful effect, but just very expensive and a little bit more of a situational use for it. Next we have Mutant Protectors. It's a 1 cost event. Play only if your identity has the X-Men trait. Hero Interrupt defense. When an enemy attacks, put an X-Men ally into play from your hand, exhaust it, and declare it the defender of this attack. So 1 cost event, all you need to do is be an X-Men to play this card, and then it does have the defense keyword, so it counts as you defending. And then when an enemy attacks, you put an X-Men ally into play from your hand. That's very powerful, and then you can target the attack to the X-Men ally instead, and it gets declared the defender. So it's a really, yeah, thing is, the amount of resources though is a little bit hefty, right? So it's, you have to play the card, which is one resource. The card itself is one resource to play, and then you can put an X-Men ally from your hand, right? So it's gonna be 3 cards gone from your hand, and then that X-Men ally can take all the damage. So it's nice because you can probably prevent all the damage with that, right? If that X-Men ally is defending and just chump blocking effectively. And if the X-Men ally has a powerful effect that can trigger, then that's nice. But yeah, I mean, 3 cards from your hand. If you have like hand size of 5, right, then you only have 2 more cards left for player phase, and you probably won't be able to do too much with it. I think if you play an X-Men ally with a power effect, you can really reap the full benefits of this. But because of that, it's going to make it a little bit more situational than I would like. So it goes in a C tier for me. I don't hate it. I'm going to put it, I'm actually going to put it above Momentum Shift. I think this card has a very high ceiling. It's just a little bit restrictive, and you definitely just need to have good X-Men allies that have like interplay effects, right? Because if they don't have an interplay effect and you just play it, then it's not going to do anything. It's just going to die. So if it just dies, we don't really want that, but we want something else to happen whenever the X-Men ally enters play. But very, like, it's a cheap, free way to get an ally into play. Well, not free because you have to play this card and the cost for it, but you don't have to pay the cost for the actual ally. Yeah. So next we have Never Back Down, 1 cost event, Hero Interrupt Defense. When you defend against an attack, you get +2 for this attack. If you take no damage from this attack, stun the attacking enemy. So this is a card that I was mixing up a little bit with Jump Flip, where this card right here has synergy with Perfect Defense. So if you take no damage from an attack, stun the attacking enemy, you can only trade this card when you are defending. So you want to ideally play this card and not take any damage, so you can stun enemy. Because of that, I think the stun is worth less than the ready, because stun will not work against stalwart and steady, and readying is always useful. So I'm putting Never Back Down definitely below Desperate Defense, and it has synergies with the Perfect Defense stuff, but I think it's, I mean, for +2 more defense, it's going to be a little bit worse than other ones. I'm going to put it right here. This is not my favorite card, because you have to take the attack, and then you can get the stun, and the stun will be useful for the next time that the villain attacks, probably in the next turn. Not a terrible card in the correct situation. It can be powerful, like with Perfect Defense, and if you need that +2 defense, but I think it's a very situational effect. Next we have Not Today, a 1 cost event, Hero Interrupt Defense. When your hero defends against an attack, it gets +2 defense for that attack. If you take no damage from that attack, remove 2 that from the scheme. So almost the exact same thing as the Never Back Down that we just talked about, but I think removing 2 that from the scheme is even less valuable than the stun. So I'm going to actually put this right behind the Never Back Down, but they are very, very similar. I think I would prefer the stun, even though it's a little bit more situational, right? If you're facing a villain that has stalwart, the stun is useless. But I think even then, I mean, the stun to me is more valuable than just removing 2 threat. Next we have Perseverance, 1 cost event, Hero Response. After you change form, give your hero a tough status card. So this is a very, very cheap way to get a tough status card, but it's a hero response when you change form. So because of that, I think it works very well with multi-form heroes, right? Like Ant-Man and Wasp, because they have a tiny form. They have 2 forms. They have a tiny form and a giant form. So if you change from tiny to giant or giant from tiny, you can get a tough status card. But for other heroes, I think it's harder for Protection to flip down, because Protection does not have the most reliable way to remove threat. So if you're playing Protection, you have to flip down to Alter Ego and flip from Alter Ego over to hero form to get that tough status card, and I think that'll make it a little bit more difficult unless you really plan and build around it. So Perseverance to me is a very situational card with a situational effect. Good effect and very cheap, but just that situation where you need to flip down to Alter Ego unless you are playing a multi-form hero, I think it hurts a little bit. I'm gonna put this card right here, and I think that if you're playing a hero with multiple forms, like if you're playing Ant-Man or Wasp, I think I can put this card in the B tier or even higher, right? Because then it's very useful, because you can change from one hero form to other, and you don't need to worry about the villain scheming against you in Protection. So I think then it would be a lot more valuable. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good way to get a tough status card, but just a little bit difficult to fulfill this response here unless you have multiple, unless you have a reliable way to flip down to Alter Ego, or if you have multiple forms that you can flip into. Next we have Powerful Punch, 2 cost event. Hero Interrupt is attack and a defense. When an enemy initiates an attack, do 4 damage to enemy. So this is an interrupt, so the attack happens before the enemy's attack. This card is very, very nice for minions because you can knock out minions before they do damage to you, and it counts as you defending because you played the defense keyword. So, I think Marvel CD is actually, CDB is down right now, which is why it didn't work. Okay, that's okay. So, yeah, I wanted to pull up, actually, I forgot what I was going to pull up anyways, but yeah, if you, I was just going to pull up Unflappable, right? So, I believe that this will fulfill the requirements for Unflappable because it has that defense keyword, so it counts you defending. You defeated the enemy, so you didn't take any damage after you defended, so you can trigger all the perfect defense stuff. So, very cool and useful effect, and it's a little bit different than all the other perfect defense cards because you're doing damage. So, I'm going to put this card, 2 for 4 is not amazing, but the fact that you can draw it up and just defeat the enemy, and it counts as a defense as well. It has to be when the villain initiates an attack, though. I think I'm going to drop it behind the Perseverance here. Okay, next we have Preemptive Strike, 1 cost event. Hero interrupt defense when a boost card is turned face up while the villain attacks. Cancel all boost icons on that card, then do 1 damage to the villain for each boost icon canceled that way. So one thing that I don't like about this card is that the star icons for boost effects do not get canceled. So even though you cancel all the boost icons, you still have to take all the boost effects, which can be very, very detrimental. I think if this was a 0 cost card, it would be a little bit more useful, right? I think that Defiance is a straight up better version of this card because, yeah, you can do damage to the enemy with the boost icons, but I don't really think I need to do damage, especially like while I'm just like trying to stabilize and build the board. I think I can always do damage later after I'm settled in. So this is not my favorite card, and I think it gets dropped a little bit more because of Defiance, because Defiance is just so much better, being a 0 cost, canceling boost icons and canceling the boost effect, and I don't think that the damage from Preemptive Strike is going to be worth it. So it goes in the C tier, and I definitely drop it more because of Defiance, but I think it still has its place, especially for perfect defense, because canceling, knowing that you're going to cancel all the boost damage, I think is still useful. So it's still very good for perfect defense. You're going to cancel the boost icons. I'm going to put this card right, I'm going to put it behind Mutant Protectors, but yeah, I think it's very close to Desperate Defense and Jump Flip, right? It has that perfect defense synergy, and if you already see the villain has like 3 attack, you know they're not going to get any more boost icons if you play a Preemptive Strike, but just 1 cost is a little bit more expensive than I would like, and damage is not going to be that useful compared to Defiance, which I think is a way better version of it. Next we have a Psi Flail Strike, 2 cost event. Play only if your identity has a psionic trait, so we're going to evaluate this card as if we're playing with a psionic character. Hero response attack. After you defend against an attack, do 3 damage to the enemy and then stun it. So a very, very good way to get a stun off. I think it's a very powerful effect. I think if you're playing psionic, does it go into B tier? Let me see. After you defend against an attack, yeah, it's okay if you take damage. All you have to do is defend, and you can play any of these other defense cards to consider a defense, right? So if you play Preemptive Strike or or not this, but if you play Preemptive Strike or a Jump Flip, it counts as you defending without exhausting. Then you can play the Psi Flail Strike, and then you can do 3 damage, which doesn't really matter that much, but then you can stun the enemy as well. So I think this is actually a pretty good card. If you're playing Psionic Protection, which I haven't heard too much about, but if you are playing that, I think this card, because after you defend, there's so many ways to defend, right? If you play Defiance, it counts as you defending as well. So I think just because of that versatility, I'm going to put this card in the A tier. I think if you're playing a Psionic Protection deck, this is definitely a card to build around. Whether you're, and even if you're not playing perfect defense, I think this is still a very, very good card. Yeah, all you gotta do is just defend, and you can do 3 damage and then stun that enemy, which is very, very good. Next we have Psychic Misdirection, 2 cost event. Play only if your identity has the psionic trait. So same thing as the as a Psi Flail Strike, that you need to have the psionic trait to play it. But we are evaluating this card as if we are playing with a psionic hero. Hero interrupt defense. When enemy attacks you, choose a different enemy. Damage from that attack is dealt to the chosen enemy instead of you. So this is a very, very cool card. I love the thematics of this card, right? It's kind of like literally just Psychic Misdirection, making the villain, or hopefully the villain, attack like the minion instead, or you can make a minion attack the villain if you want to make that big final push with this card. Very, very good card. I'm gonna put it, let's see, I'm gonna put it, it's gonna go first in the A tier for me. I think it's very, very good. And the only reason that it's not, sorry, first in the B tier, I mean. And the only reason it doesn't go in the A tier, right? I think its effect is A tier level because you are effectively playing a defense card right here, which counts as the defense for Unflappable and all those protection, like perfect defense upgrades that we're just talking about. And you don't take any damage because you redirect an attack to someone else, so you're not going to take any damage at all. But the only thing is you need to have a minion out, right? If there's no minion out, if there's not at least 2 enemies, you cannot play a second Misdirection because you can't choose a different enemy. So that is the only thing that's holding this card back. But if you're playing a scenario that has a lot of minions, if you have a minion out in play, you can redirect the attack of a minion or the villain. And I think that, I mean, its effect, I really want to put in A tier, but I think just the fact that it needs to have a minion in play keeps it out of the A tier for me. But yeah, I mean, being able to cancel out an entire activation effectively, right? Because the villain's just not attacking you anymore. They're attacking someone else. Their own minions, right? Very, very good effect. It's doing so many things, right? It's knocking out a minion for you, potentially. It's preventing a villain activation. Super duper good card. If there's just some way to guarantee that this card comes out with that minion, it's probably even an S tier level card. It's just so powerful and definitely worth its 2 costs during the villain's phase. So very, very good card that I like a lot. Next we have Repurpose. Okay, 0 cost event, hero action, discard a tech upgrade you control, and then you can ready up your hero and choose thwart attack or defense until the end of the round. Your hero gets plus X to that chosen power, where X is equal to that upgrade's printed cost. Okay, so Repurpose is a very, very good card. Repurpose works very well in the Repurpose archetype where you have a bunch of tech upgrades out, and then you can just discard them by playing Repurpose, and then you get plus to all yours, to whatever stat that you choose. So it's very versatile because you can choose thwart, attack, or defense. This is a very, very good card. Let me see. I'm gonna put. It's hard to rank here, but I'm gonna put Repurpose in A tier, and I'm put it first in A tier. I think it's definitely that good, but it doesn't go in S tier for me, even though it has an S tier level effect, right? I think Repurpose is a game changer. It can end games, right? Giving you a ready, giving you plus to any set that you choose, right? It can help you remove more threat to keep the game alive or do more damage to do that final big push at the villain. Repurpose is really, really good for doing a final big push at the villain. But the only reason I keep it out of S tier is because early game, before you get your tech upgrades, Repurpose is a dead card, right? It's not going to be good all the time. It's only going to be good after you get those tech upgrades out and you're ready to make that final push. And I mean, it's good like mid game too when you have the tech upgrades out and you need to thwart for a lot or do whatever damage to defeat a minion or anything like that, right? But you just need setup for the card first. And without that setup, this card is a dead card. So for that reason, I'm going to keep it right under the S tier, but definitely a very, very high ceiling type of card. And if you can maximize its effects, like, you know, S+++ tier, super duper good card. Very powerful card that I love to build around as well. Next we have Return the Favor, 0 cost event, hero action attack. Discard cards from the top of the encounter deck until you discard a treachery. Review that treachery and then do 5 damage to the villain. So what's nice that this card is 0 cost. So if the villain has like 5 damage left or 5 hit points left, it's a good way to defeat the villain. You just have to take a treachery. So this card is a little bit hard. I'm gonna put this card in the C tier. I don't think it's terrible. I think it's good for a final push even against some more difficult villains, right? For a final push, I think this card's always gonna be good. But that makes it already situational. I'm gonna just put it right here, I guess. So yeah, I mean, if the villain's already very, very low, so I'm putting a C tier. If the villain's already very, very low and you just need 5 more damage, this card is like awesome, 0 cost. You just have to play the card from your hand, so 1 effective cost to do 5 damage, which is great. And treasury is not gonna be that bad if you already have the kill shot in your hand. But if you have early game or mid game or anything like that, you can only do damage to the villain, so this card does not help you control the board and defeat minions. And then getting another treachery card is more so that you have to deal with, and I don't think that's going to be worth 5 damage unless it's 5 damage for a big push. So because of that, I don't think this card is that good. It can be good in a correct situation, so definitely a C tier level card for me. Next we have Second Wind, 3 cost event, heal 4 damage from an identity, 5 damage instead if you pay for this card using a mental resource. So 3 costs for 4 healing. I mean, in another aspect it may be better, but I mean it can only be from an identity, so not from ally, right? It's cool you can pick different identities, but This card to me is not very good. Is it D tier level? Okay, this is gonna be hard. Let's see, is it a D tier level? Is there gonna be a situation where you wanna heal 5 damage for 3 cost? I don't know. I'm tempted to put this right now in the D tier just because it's so expensive for 5 cost. I mean, it's for 4 healing, it's terrible. For 5 healing, and you get a mentor resource, I mean, it could be better. Yeah, so I think second wind, comparing this card to Med Team, right? Med Team is also a 3 cost card, but Med Team is a support card for 3 cost. And you can heal, for the Med Team, you get it out in play, it stays in play forever. You can exhaust or remove a med counter to heal 2 damage from anybody, including an ally. So I think that it just has more value in the Med Team, right? The second wind will give you a more bursty heal for 1 turn, but there's so much less versatility because you only heal from an identity. And it's just 1 turn versus the Med Team. You can do it overall throughout multiple turns whenever you really need it. And Med Team just heals more overall as well, right? Because it's 3 costs for healing 2 each time. So Med Team is going to be a total of 6 healing for 3 costs. Second wind is either 5 or 4 healing at once for 3 costs. And Med Team is already a little bit of an expensive card. So because I think that Med Team is just so much better than second wind, and this is definitely a card I've never used. I don't know if I ever would use this card. I think this card's unplayable in protection. It might be playable in a different aspect because other aspects have lesser ways to heal. But I mean, protection just has a lot of different ways to recover, especially in hero form. What's nice is that this card, you can use it in Alter Ego as well. But I mean, if you're playing protection, I mean, you want to be in hero most of the time because it's hard to remove that threat. And I mean, I think that this card, it's a little bit unplayable for me. Let me know if you guys agree or disagree with that and if I'm missing something on the second wind. Okay, next we have Shake It Off. 1 cost event. Hero response after a guardian character takes any amount of damage from an attack. Give that character a tough status card. Okay, so when a guard, so you have to take damage first, and you can give a tough right after. I like the Groot art on here, but yeah, this card is, is this another D tier card back to back with second wind? So a guardian character has to take damage first, and it must be from an attack. Then you can get a tough status card. Oh man, okay, I'll put it in the C tier. I'll put it last tier because I guess if a minion attacks you and you take 1 damage from the 1 attack minion, then you can play Shake It Off as a hero response. You get a tough status card for just 1 cost and then tank the next villain's attack next turn or the next time the villain activates. And then it could be very useful in that like very specific situation. But other than that, I don't think this card can get much use. And even then, it's not like amazing because it's so slow. Because, yeah, I mean, if you're already taking a full villain attack to the face and you have to take an attack to get it. Actually, you know what? I am kind of mis-evaluating this card right now as I'm speaking it through. I think I'm missing a lot with it. So if you're defending and you're doing all this stuff with perfect defense and damage still bleeds over, then you'll be taking damage. And you can still play this card and get that tough status card. So actually, there are a lot more ways to get value out of this card than what I was originally thinking about. So I'm gonna move it up in the C tier. I was wrong about my initial thoughts about this card. Getting that tough is very nice. Definitely still C tier because it is situational. But getting a tough for 1 cost, I think is very good. I would just prefer it before I take damage from an enemy attack, but I still mitigate a lot of the damage. I think it's worse than Perseverance tough. I think it's worse than Hard Knocks is tough. I like Fighting Fit more. And for Deflection, when a identity will take amount of damage, you can prevent some damage. These two can work well together. Yeah, I'll put Shake It Off here. So you have to be playing a Guardian. You have to have a Guardian character, but that's probably going to be your identity if you want to maximize the full benefits of this card, because a tough status card is more valuable on your identity than is on an ally, because your ally, to take the tough, they have to take consequential damage, which is not that much damage, or they have to actually exhaust to defend, versus an identity can just take an attack to the face where the tough will soak that up. So yeah, I mean, it's a decent card. I think you just have to put it in the correct situation and deck build around it to maximize the full benefits of Shake It Off. Okay, next we have Shield Spell, 0 cost event. Play only if your identity has the Mystic trait. Max 1 per deck. Hero Interrupt. Defense. When you would take any amount of damage from an attack, discard that many cards from the top of your deck. Prevent all that damage. So Shield Spell, is Shield Spell S tier? I think that is the question. I think Shield Spell is S tier. And we're going to evaluate this card as we're playing with a Mystic identity, right? You only use it in hero form, but this is literally just the same as Spider-Man's backflip, right? A 0-cost defense event with the defense keyword, so it counts as defending, and you can prevent all the damage that you would take from an attack. Backflip is just a regular interrupt, so you could use Spider-Man's backflip in hero form or in Alter Ego, but for Shield Spell, you can only use this card in hero form, but I mean, that's fine. Most of the time, you're only going to be taking damage from an attack in hero form anyway, so that's like, there's nothing bad about that. And then the only bad thing is that you have discard cards from the top of your deck equal to the amount of damage that you take, so you're milling your deck a little bit, but to prevent all that damage, I mean, this can prevent like up to, what, 15, 20 damage from like a Ronin or something like that, right? So, I mean, super duper good card. If you have this card in your hand, you are safe from damage for a full activation, and you know that for sure. That's very, very good. You can see the damage first as well, right? Because it's where you would take any amount of damage from an attack, not when you would defend. So you can just see what the boost and everything is first, and then choose whether you want to play Shield Spell or not. Definitely an S tier level event. Probably the best protection event in the game. So good, and has synergy with Unflappable and all the perfect defense stuff as well, because you're not taking damage, so you can trigger all those effects. But even without that, that's what makes this card so good. It's just always going to be useful to be able to play a card and prevent all damage from an attack. Very, very powerful card. If you're playing in Mystic Protection, Shield Spell, I think, is an auto include. Next, we have Sidestep, 1-cost event, Hero Interrupt Defense, where you would take any amount of damage, prevent 3 of that damage. If you pay for this card using a energy resource, deal 1 damage to an enemy. So when you take an amount of damage, you can prevent 3. Preventing 3 is okay, but the thing is, this effect right here is not contingent on not taking damage, which I like, but 1 damage to an enemy, I mean, it can be useful in a very specific type of case, but I think most of the time it's not going to be that useful. So I think it's less valuable than the stun here. Pinging 1 damage, I would prefer to remove 2 threat than ping off 1 damage. And obviously it can be useful for an enemy that has retaliate, because it's not considered an attack activation, right? So you won't take retaliate. It's useful for getting bypassing guard, pinging off tufts, right? Sidestep can be good, but I think most of the time I'd rather just 2 threat from the scheme, because this can do a side scheme as well, right? So yeah, these have similar effects where you're preventing some damage and doing some other effect. But I like these guys a lot more than Sidestep, even though these guys are more contingent on not taking damage. And Sidestep doesn't matter if you take damage or not, but I think that this effect is just a little bit lackluster for me to put it above these cards here. Next, we have Stand Together, 4-cost event Alliance, so you can pay for this as a group in multiplayer. Hero Interrupt, when a friendly character would take any amount of damage from an attack, exhaust an Avenger character and a Guardian character as a cost arrow, and then prevent all of that damage, and then do that much damage to attacking enemies. So this is a super duper powerful card. You have to exhaust an Avenger character and a Guardian character, right? 4 cost is expensive, but this card is very, very good in multiplayer because you usually have that Avenger character and Guardian character out in like 2 identities, and then you can prevent all the damage and do that much damage back to the attacking enemy. That is invaluable, right? Especially against the more difficult scenarios, you're getting so much more benefit out of this card. I'm going to put this card in a B tier. It's hard for me to rate, so I'm going to put it last in B tier just because it is a multiplayer-oriented card. I think if you're playing multiplayer with the Guardian Avengers, A tier, right? Possibly even S tier. But if you're playing solo, it's way harder to get this triggering condition because you need an ally, right? And then you have to exhaust yourself and the ally and pay 4 costs by yourself, which is pretty hefty to do in the villain phase. Yeah, but I mean, this is a very, very good card in multiplayer, especially with the alliance and being able to do damage back. I mean, Ronin can hit you for 15. You just do 15 damage right back at him and prevent 15. So 2 things at once. It can be invaluable. You just really need to really plan around it, specifically playing it in multiplayer. Or in solo, there's not really any way to make this card good. I think in solo, this is like a C tier or D tier level card. Next, we have Subdue, 1-cost event. When an enemy initiates an attack, that enemy gets -3 for that attack. So 1 cost to kind of prevent some damage. I'm not the biggest fan of this card because first off, it doesn't have the defense keyword, so it won't count as you defending. So it doesn't have the synergy with the other cards here. And then it's very similar to like, something like, let's say, Expert Defense. When you're here defending against an attack, it gets +3 for that, +3 defense for that attack, right? So it's like the flip version of it. Instead of getting the extra defense, you're subtracting the attack from the villain. This can be nice if you don't want to exhaust to defend, and then you want to play this card so you can stay readied up and just prevent 3 damage. But I think that's not that valuable, especially in protection, because you want to be not exhausted to defend, but defending, right? accessing the defending keyword so that you can trigger those effects with unflappable and all the perfect defense stuff. And this card will not trigger that because it doesn't count as a defense activation. So it has a little bit of anti-synergy, but it definitely still can be useful. It's not B tier level for me. It definitely goes into C tier. And as for where in the C tier, I do like it more than these cards here. Yeah, so I'm gonna put it right here in the C tier before bait and switch and get behind me, because these are a little bit more perfect defense oriented, right? Because this card, you need the enemy to attack you, and this works really well during the player phase. And other than that, you don't want attacks against the more difficult scenarios. And then subdue right here, this will work for any scenario. It'll work even if you're not playing perfect defense. It's just not that high of a ceiling, right? It's just nice to not have to exhaust to reduce some damage from the attack. Next we have Tackle, 3-cost event, hero action attack, stun an enemy. If you pay for this card using a physical resource, do 3 damage to an enemy. So what we're really looking for is that stun. That 3 damage is not that big of a deal. I love this card with Wolverine's Claws as well, because you can pay for it because it's considered an attack event. And then you just get a free stun. Or not free stun, but a 3 hit point damage with Wolverine's Claws to get that stun. So this card is definitely B tier for me. How high in the B tier is it gonna go? 3 cost is a little bit expensive just to get a stun. The 3 damage to me doesn't matter that much. It's more so the stun that we're getting. Yeah, I'm gonna put it last in the B tier, because I think that the potential of this card is a lot higher than like a Never Back Down, where if you take no defense from attack, then you can stun enemy. You can be a little bit more proactive with tackle, and this card works in decks that are not perfect defense as well, right? Getting a stun is always going to be good unless the villain has Stalwart or Steady. But Steady is still a little bit useful, but yeah, I mean, it's just very, very expensive to get this card down. But if you have an empty roster spot in protection, I mean, I wouldn't mind putting tackle in. 3 costs for a stun is not terrible. It's just a little bit pricey. Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem with this card. Next we have Taunt, 1-cost event, hero action. The villain attacks you. Other characters cannot defend against that attack, and then you can draw 3 cards. So this is a very, very powerful card that I've seen a lot of decks build out of. I am not the biggest fan of Taunt compared to a lot of other people. So for me, Taunt goes in a C tier. The card draw is very, very nice, but it's another one of those the villain attacks you type of effects. I do like it more than the other effects where the villain attacks you, right? Like I like drawing 3 cards more than removing 4 from a scheme. I like drawing 3 more than canceling a treachery. But even then, it's still the same thing where you need a villain to attack you. And then one added thing is that other characters cannot defend against its attack. That's okay in perfect defense, right? Because you want to be defending anyways, right? You want your hero to be the one defending. And it's just like bait and switch. It's a nice way to get the villain to attack during your turn. You can trigger all your perfect defense stuff and then still draw 3 cards on top of it because of the taunt. However, the only reason that it goes into C tier is because you do need, I think, that setup to really get the full benefits of this card. Right? Drawing 3, I don't think it's just randomly worth taking a full villain attack to the face. You really want to mitigate the damage from that attack, and you cannot have an ally defend for you. And then I have one more thing that I wanted to say about this card. The villain attacks you, other characters cannot defend against the attack. Yeah, I don't quite remember, but yeah, I think it's a solid card. It just works better in perfect defense, and against the more difficult scenarios, I think it's a little bit weaker because we don't want the villain to attack us because they might have other things tied to their attack activation, right? Like if he plays against Magneto, he's gonna get a mana counter because he gets a mana counter each time he attacks. If he plays against Venom Goblin will trigger Claim the Throne, and he's gonna do stuff with his main scheme specials, right? So I mean, this card gets worse and worse the more difficult the villain that you face. Yeah, so where's it go? I mean, these cards have similar issues to that. I'm gonna put Taunt. I do like it a lot more than the other cards. Maybe even first in the C tier. Yeah, I think I'm fine putting it. Actually, Leading Blow just has such a high potential. I'm gonna put Leading Blow first. But yeah, Taunt is gonna be second here in the C tier for me. And let me know. I know a lot of people love Taunt. I like the card too. I just think that its max potential is a little bit more restrictive than a lot of other cards, and you really, really need to deck build around it to maximize the full benefits of this card. I think that if I have an empty roster spot in protection, I'm not just gonna put Taunt in because, I mean, especially against the more difficult scenarios, villain attacks can be very, very detrimental. Next we have the Gardener. 2-cost event, shuffle this card into the encounter deck without looking as an action. So you have to pay for 2 costs to play this card from your hand, and you can shuffle this card into the encounter deck. And then when reviewed from the encounter deck, heal 2 damage from your identity and remove this card from the game. This effect cannot be cancelled. So this card, I mean, yeah, this is going to be the other D tier card here. Yeah, same as the other cosmic entity cards, right? It's nice to cancel out, not cancel out. It's nice that turn that if you draw this card from the encounter deck, you don't have to deal with another encounter card, right? You get an easy encounter card right here, which is just healing 2. Healing 2, I think, is not as valuable as just getting this card as an encounter card itself and not getting an actual encounter card. So the healing 2 doesn't really do anything, but yeah, I do like, I mean, it's not bad, right? Healing 2 is always going to be a little bit useful. And then, yeah, but I mean, just way too situational, right? You need to play this card. You need to have enough control the board to where you kind of waste 2 resources and this card and nothing happens for a long while until you potentially draw this card. And if you don't draw it, right, if you get this card as a boost card, it's not going to do anything, and then you have to still take the encounter card as normal, right? So just way too many limiting factors. This card definitely goes last in the D tier here for me. Next we have Thwip Thwip, a 2-cost event, hero action. Do 1 damage to a web warrior character you control, and then place up to 2 stun statuses on up to 2 enemies. So Thwip Thwip is nice, especially stuff for steady, right? You just play it, and then you do 1 damage to a web warrior character you control, and you can stun twice. So that's a pretty viable way to get a good stun and to get a complete stun off on a steady villain. Not my favorite card. Assuming that we are playing this with Web Warrior Protection, I think that even if I have an empty roster spot, I'm not just going to put Thwip Thwip in. At the same time, the stun is good. Is it actually better than Tackle? Right, if you're playing Web Warriors, is Thwip Thwip better than Tackle? You take 1 damage, you just place. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to put it right here. I think it's better than Tackle for sure, right? Because Tackle is 3 costs to get a stun and potentially 3 damage. Thwip Thwip is you take 1 damage on your identity or a Web Warrior ally, and you can place up to 2 stun status cards. So you can just stun a steady villain, or you can put stun on a minion and the villain, right? So yeah, you know, I think if I have empty roster spot, I kind of misspoke there. Right? I think this definitely can go in a Web Warrior Protection deck. Yeah, just if you're looking for stuns, right? If the villain has Star Wars Steady, it's not going to be as good, obviously. And actually, this card is one of the few cards that work very well against Steady because you can put 2 stun stats and just fully stun the villain. So this card is only negated by Stalwart. But yeah, I think 2 costs 1 damage for 2 stuns. I think that's very, very good cost. And better than the Tackle. Okay, next we have True Grit, a 1-cost event. Response thwart after your hero defends against enemy attack. Remove threat from a scheme, so it can be any scheme, equal to your hero's thwart. So in protection, there's not that many ways to increase your hero's thwart. So it's going to be probably not that much thwart removal, maybe just like 2 or 3 for 1 cost. So it's actually just giving you another activation for 1 cost, but a very situational type of effect, right? It would be better to just get a ready during the player phase. Yeah, after your hero defends against an enemy attack. So yeah, I mean, it's good because you don't need to not take damage, right? Even if you take damage, it still counts. You can still play the True Grit, but not my favorite card. This card goes in the C tier for me. It's just 1-cost event to help you thwart for whatever your current thwart is. I'm gonna put it right here. Yeah, right in front of first hit, which is 1 for 2 damage. I think the 1 for whatever third moves could be a little more valuable. And I think the second effect right here with the minion thing is a little bit similar to the situational effects that you need for True Grit. So I'm gonna just put it right here. I think that, you know, you had the deck build around it and make it really, really good. And I think it's very, very hard for protection. But it's a nice way to get a free thwart off without exhausting. Okay, and lastly, we have our last protection event. 2-cost event, What Doesn't Kill Me, with the awesome Spider-Man art here. Requirement is at least 1 physical resource whenever you are paying for this card. Hero action, heal 2 damage from your hero, and then cost arrow, ready up your hero. So this card is very similar to the Momentum Shift here. Where is Momentum Shift? Right here, right? Heal 2 damage from your hero, and then cost arrow, do 2 damage. So just like the Momentum Shift for What Doesn't Kill Me, if you do not have 2 damage to heal, you cannot ready up your hero. You cannot use this card's effect to get your ready, right? So you have to have at least 2 sustained damage. You need to be able to play this card and then heal 2, and then you can get that ready. So for that reason, I'm not going to put it in S tier, but this is probably my favorite protection card, and it definitely goes all the way up into A tier for me. Is it better than Repurpose? Repurpose has a higher ceiling. No, yeah, I think Repurpose is definitely better than What Doesn't Kill Me, and his Defiance better than What Doesn't Kill Me. I like What Doesn't Kill Me a little bit more. Okay, so for this card here, it's definitely an A tier level card for me. There's many times where I'm only playing protection because I want to use this card. I just love the readies with it. I love that it's a 2-cost ready, and you can heal 2 as well. It helps sustain your hero, right? Being able to recover in hero form and getting it ready is always going to be valuable to managing the board and just not needing to flip down to Alter Ego because you're keeping your hit points up by constantly playing these What Doesn't Kill Me's here. So I think that's because of that, it's a very powerful card. If you draw this card early game, just like Repurpose, it's still a dead card in your hand because you don't have sustained damage yet, unless you have a way to take damage early game like Wolverine or X-23, in which case the What Doesn't Kill Me, you can play it first turn. So for those two heroes, I think What Doesn't Kill Me is even better because they have ways to hurt themselves to make sure that they take damage. But I mean, even then, if you're playing the more difficult scenarios, I think that damage is always going to bleed through. So I really like this card with Miles as well. Yeah, just giving Miles extra readies on top of his double life stuff. So yeah, this is probably my favorite protection card, and I like it a lot. I think it can go into any protection deck, and it can be a deck that you build around too to get extra readies as well. So yeah, there we have it. So this is my entire protection events tier list for Marvel Champions. Unfortunately, we do have a lot in the C tier because I think a lot of the perfect defense stuff, to me, I don't rate it that high. That's just my opinions personally, because I don't value perfect defense that highly in terms of its power. So its cards are not going to be as high. I think that it's a little more situational. You need all the other stuff set up for it. And even if you have everything set up, it's still a little bit difficult to use against the more difficult scenarios like Expert Ronin or Expert Venom Goblin. I have 2 cards here in the D tier, a couple in the B tier, and then the only S tier protection event is the Shield spell for Mystic types. I think this is a very powerful card, almost the exact same as Backflip, which is definitely one of the most powerful defense events in the game. So yeah, this is my list. Let me know what you guys think, if you guys agreed or disagreed with anything, and I will see you guys in the next one.